So our learning objectives are to try to understand what the realists were focused on depicting in their works and how this was related to the culture. Why is this a sign of the time that people were living in? To do that, we're going to talk about this idea that after the Romantic movement, towards the end of the middle to the end of the 19th century, we have this idea in arts, and the idea is labeled realism. And it was very different. Remember when we were talking about Romanticism and we said that Theodore Géricault's Raft of the Medusa was unusual because it depicted a contemporary event. The realists said, well, only things that are part of our contemporary or current world are real. Everything else, history, is we weren't there, we don't know for sure if it's real. Myth, we don't know if that's real. If we fantasize about the future, we don't know if that's real. The only thing in the world that is real is our current events. So they decided to focus their attention on those things, real people. The realists that we're going to focus on are Gustave Courbet, Honoré Daumier. Eventually we're going to get to Edouard Manet. And Manet, he is a tricky one because he is a realist. He's also a modernist. So we'll talk about him in the next lecture. Okay, so Gustave Courbet. Let's see here. That's not fitting very well. Hopefully that's a little better for you to see. Gustave Courbet, he was submitting his work to the Salon. If you remember, we talked about the academy that Louis XIV started. Each year, actually twice a year, the academy would do an art show. And this was widely accepted in society. If your art made it into the academy, you were considered a good artist. Well, Courbet had sent several pieces and the academy rejected them all. So he responded by renting his own pavilion and showing his own work, which he called the Pavilion of Realism. This is a quote by Courbet. He says that this title was given to him. He didn't set about creating this title for himself, which is how it works very often in art. But I want to draw your attention to this part. He says, I have no more wanted to imitate the former than to copy the latter, right? He doesn't want to imitate the things that he studied in art school. He doesn't want to copy them either, right? He doesn't want to copy the ancient world. Nor do I have this thought of achieving the idle aim of art for art's sake. This is a term that is coined by Oscar Wilde. It's one of the things that the Romantics were talking about. It's okay just to make art for pleasure. He says, no, I have simply wanted to draw from a thorough knowledge of tradition the reasoned and free sense of my own individuality, to be able to translate the customs, ideas, and appearances of my time as I see them. In a word, to create a living art. This has been my aim. So he's saying the only thing that makes sense to me is this world I'm living in now. Why would I spend this time thinking about all these other things? Get rid of this guy. Okay, so this one is really the one that just shocked the world. It's even bigger than the Stonebreakers. This one's 10 by 21 feet. It's enormous. And this one is called The Burial at Ornans. And the critics hated this. They didn't understand it. Why would he make this giant painting and make it so depressing? So when you look at this painting, one of the things the critics didn't like was how much people are all jammed up in here, right? It looks very crowded. It doesn't look very organized. If you were typically going to make a painting, you would put your center of focus here. Other things that are less important would be less detailed, maybe around the edges. But Courbet says that's not real life. That's not how life really happens. In fact, this painting actually looks more like a photograph. Do you notice how people are cut off here at the edge? Because that's real life. If you were actually going to a funeral, you might see a big crowd of people. You wouldn't see just a perfectly posed vignette in the center. This is a little confusing for students. This gentleman right here is a member of the clergy. He's holding a staff that has the crucifix on it. That's not Christ on the hill in the background. The other thing about this is that there's a whole range of emotions. Some people are very sad that this gentleman has died. Other people, they look like, yeah, we're here, we want to pay our respects, but we're not personally really affected by this. And then these little boys, they just look bored. When can I leave? So it's giving you this full range of emotions that you would maybe encounter at a funeral. That's real life. The other thing that really ticked people off was this giant hole right in the front of the canvas. So when you stand here, it feels like at any minute you could fall into that hole. To make it even worse, there's a skull right here to the side. The reason Courbet included this, his message was, we don't know what happens after someone dies. We could imagine that they go to heaven. We can paint paintings that show them united with Christ, but we don't know. All we know is that this body is going in this hole in the ground. And in fact, he makes it even more brutal. He is showing us that not only is this body going in this hole, another body was in there previously. It's a way of, it's sort of relentless in its realism. Death is coming for us all. Now, to compare, this is the painting I had on there earlier. When you look at this painting, remember this one by El Greco of the Count Orgaz. Here you have the Pope. These are mythical figures, right? Both of these guys were dead and they came back. St. Stephen here came back because Orgaz was such a good guy that they came to lower him into his grave themselves. And this is all very sad, but our painter here, El Greco, says, but it's okay because look, his soul is right here. He's joining Jesus and Mary and John the Baptist in heaven. This is what people are typically used to seeing when they see a painting depicting a burial, something that gives them some hope. And in fact, this is something we still do. If a lot of times if we hear someone passing, we'll say things like, oh, they're in a better place, because it makes the people here on earth feel better. But Gustave Courbet, he's not allowing us that. He is just showing us the brutal reality of this burial, of this death. Okay, so moving on. This is what we talked about. There's nothing heroic or sublime about this death. Some even called this work primitive because Courbet was known for using his palette knife and scraping the paint directly from his palette onto the canvas with the knife. And this really was very unusual at the time because remember, the goal in the academy was to hide your brushstrokes.